The morning mist hung heavy over Windsor Castle as Queen Camilla stood at her private study window, her fingers drumming against the mahogany desk. The events of the past week had pushed her to a breaking point that few had ever witnessed. Prince William, the heir apparent, had crossed a line that she could no longer ignore. It had started innocently enough. William had been questioning certain financial decisions regarding the Duchy of Cornwall, decisions that Camilla had influenced heavily during King Charles's recent illness. The king had been bedridden for 3 weeks with a severe respiratory infection, leaving much of the day-to-day royal business in Camilla's capable hands. She had grown comfortable in this role, perhaps too comfortable. The Prince of Wales had discovered irregularities in the accounts. Money that should have been allocated for estate maintenance had been redirected to causes close to Camilla's heart, particularly her literacy charity and several organizations supporting victims of domestic violence. While the causes were noble, the methods were questionable. William had confronted her privately first, his voice steady but firm. "Your Majesty," he had said, standing in the very same study where she now plotted her next move. "These expenditures need proper parliamentary approval. We cannot simply redistribute funds even for worthy causes." Camilla had dismissed his concerns with a wave of her hand. "Your father trusts my judgment completely. These are urgent matters that cannot wait for bureaucratic procedures." But William had pressed on, his sense of duty overriding any personal loyalty. "This sets a dangerous precedent. The monarchy's credibility depends on transparency and proper procedures." Their argument had escalated over several days. William had threatened to bring the matter to the Privy Council, forcing Camilla's hand. If the council investigated, they would discover not just the unauthorized transfers, but also her private correspondence with several government ministers, attempting to influence policy decisions regarding domestic violence legislation. The Queen Consort had always been passionate about her causes, but during Charles's illness that passion had evolved into something more assertive, more political than the traditionally neutral stance expected of royalty. She had convinced herself that her actions were justified, that someone needed to make decisive moves while her husband recovered. William's threat to expose her activities had triggered something primal in Camilla. She had worked too hard, come too far to have her authority undermined by a man who still saw her as the woman who had caused his mother's pain decades earlier. The old wounds, carefully concealed beneath years of public reconciliation, began to bleed again. That evening, she had summoned Commander Harrison, the head of the Royal Protection Unit. Harrison was a career military man, loyal to the crown but bound by protocol and law. He had served the royal family for 15 years, through scandals and triumphs alike. "Commander," Camilla had begun, her voice carrying the weight of royal authority, "I have reason to believe that the Prince of Wales has been acting against the interests of the Crown. His recent behavior suggests a concerning disregard for proper channels of authority." Harrison had shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Your Majesty, could you be more specific about these concerns?" Camilla had chosen her words carefully, weaving truth with interpretation until the fabric of her narrative seemed reasonable. "He has been making unauthorized inquiries into confidential royal business, potentially compromising sensitive information. His actions could be construed as undermining the stability of the monarchy during a critical time." She had paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle before delivering her shocking command. "I believe it is necessary to place the Prince of Wales under house arrest, pending a full investigation into his activities." The silence that followed seemed to stretch for hours rather than seconds. Harrison's face had gone pale, his years of training at odds with the unprecedented nature of the order. Never in modern royal history had one senior royal ordered the arrest of another. "Your Majesty," Harrison had finally managed, "this is an extraordinary request. Such an action would require substantial justification and proper authorization." Camilla had risen from her chair, her posture regal and commanding. "I am the Queen Consort, speaking with the full authority of the Crown during His Majesty's incapacity." "Are you questioning my authority, Commander?" Harrison had found himself caught between loyalty, duty, and an instinctive understanding that something was fundamentally wrong with the situation. The Prince of Wales was known for his integrity and dedication to proper procedure. The idea that he would act against the Crown's interests seemed implausible. "Ma'am, I would need to verify this order through proper channels." Perhaps we should wait for His Majesty's recovery, or consult with the private secretary. Camilla's eyes had flashed with anger. There is no time for consultation. Every moment we delay risks further damage to the monarchy. I am giving you a direct order, Commander. Will you carry it out, or must I question your loyalty as well? The conversation had ended with Harrison requesting time to consider the implications and prepare the necessary procedures. He had left the study deeply troubled, knowing that the next few hours would test not just his loyalty to the crown, but his understanding of where true authority lay. As morning broke over Windsor Castle, Camilla prepared for what she believed would be a decisive moment in establishing her authority. She had convinced herself that William's challenge to her actions during Charles's illness was part of a broader conspiracy to undermine her position. The woman who had once been content to support her husband quietly from the sidelines had tasted real power and found it intoxicating. The stage was set for a confrontation that would shake the very foundations of the modern British monarchy. In a few hours, royal guards would be forced to choose between competing claims of authority, and the delicate balance of constitutional monarchy would face its greatest test in generations. Camilla stood at her window, watching the sunrise paint the ancient stones of Windsor Castle in shades of gold and amber. She had no idea that her bid for absolute authority would ultimately reveal the true strength of the institution she sought to control. Commander Harrison spent a sleepless night wrestling with the most difficult decision of his military career. In his modest quarters within Windsor Castle, he sat surrounded by protocol manuals and constitutional law books, searching for precedent that simply did not exist. The Queen Consort's order to arrest the Prince of Wales challenged everything he understood about royal hierarchy and proper procedure. By dawn, Harrison had reached a troubling conclusion. While Camilla held significant authority as Queen Consort, especially during the King's illness, her power was not absolute. The Prince of Wales, as heir apparent, held constitutional standing that could not be simply swept aside by royal decree. More importantly, Harrison's oath of loyalty was to the crown itself, not to any individual member of the royal family. At 7 in the morning, Harrison made a decision that would change the course of events. Instead of following Camilla's direct order, he placed a secure call to Sir Edward Whitmore, the King's private secretary. Whitmore had served 3 monarchs and understood the constitutional implications better than anyone. Sir Edward, Harrison began carefully, I need to discuss a matter of extreme sensitivity regarding chain of command during His Majesty's illness. Whitmore, despite the early hour, immediately grasped the gravity of the situation. Commander, are you calling from a secure line? Yes, sir. I received an extraordinary order yesterday evening that requires constitutional clarification before I can proceed. Harrison outlined the situation without revealing specific details, speaking in careful code that Whitmore understood perfectly. The private secretary's silence on the other end of the line spoke volumes. Commander, Whitmore finally replied, I believe a meeting with the Prince of Wales is urgently required. Can you arrange a private audience this morning? That may be complicated, sir. The Queen Consort expects action on her directive within the hour. I understand completely. Proceed with extreme caution and remember that your ultimate loyalty is to the constitutional monarchy, not to any individual directive that may conflict with established precedent. Meanwhile, Prince William was beginning his morning routine, completely unaware of the storm brewing around him.
He had spent the previous evening reviewing financial documents, preparing to present his findings to the appropriate committees through proper channels.
His approach was methodical and by the book, characteristics that had served him well throughout his royal duties. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, noticed her husband's preoccupation during breakfast. You've been working late every night this week. Is everything all right? William looked up from the papers scattered across their private dining table. There are some irregularities in the duchy accounts that need addressing. Nothing that can't be handled through proper procedures, but it requires careful documentation. Catherine had lived within the royal family long enough to recognize the delicate nature of internal conflicts. Perhaps you should speak with your father directly when he's feeling better. I intend to, William replied, unaware that his stepmother had already painted him as a threat to the monarchy itself. At 9 o'clock sharp, Commander Harrison arrived at William's private office, his usual composed demeanor betraying subtle signs of stress. The Prince of Wales immediately noticed the tension. Commander, you seem troubled. What brings you here so early? Harrison had rehearsed this moment throughout the sleepless night, but the reality proved more difficult than anticipated. Your Royal Highness, I've been placed in an unprecedented position that requires your immediate attention. William set down his morning briefing papers and focused entirely on Harrison. The commander's formal tone suggested something far more serious than routine security matters. Last evening, I received an order from Her Majesty the Queen Consort regarding your recent activities. The order was of such an extraordinary nature that I felt compelled to seek clarification before proceeding. Harrison paused, choosing his words with extreme care. Your Royal Highness, I have been directed to place you under house arrest pending an investigation into alleged activities against the Crown's interests. The silence that followed was profound. William's face showed no emotion beyond slight confusion, as if he were processing information that made no logical sense. I beg your pardon, Commander. Could you repeat that? The Queen Consort believes your recent inquiries into royal financial matters constitute a threat to the stability of the monarchy. She has ordered your immediate detention. William stood slowly, his movements deliberate and controlled. Years of royal training had taught him to maintain composure under even the most extraordinary circumstances. But this situation tested those limits. Commander Harrison, William said quietly, I assume you understand the constitutional implications of such an order. Yes, Your Royal Highness. That is precisely why I felt compelled to inform you directly, rather than proceed with the directive. William walked to the window overlooking the castle grounds, his mind racing through the political and constitutional ramifications. He understood immediately that this was not simply about financial irregularities. This was about power, authority, and the fundamental structure of the monarchy itself. What response does the Queen Consort expect? Harrison shifted uncomfortably. She expects compliance within the hour, Your Royal Highness. However, I believe this matter requires broader constitutional consideration. William turned from the window, his decision already formed. Commander, I appreciate your discretion in handling this matter. I believe a direct conversation with the Queen Consort is necessary to resolve this misunderstanding. Your Royal Highness, I must advise caution. The Queen Consort appeared quite determined in her position. William nodded thoughtfully. Nevertheless, I intend to address this directly. The monarchy cannot function if senior members operate outside established constitutional frameworks. As William prepared to confront Camilla directly, neither he nor Harrison fully understood the depth of the Queen Consort's conviction that her authority was being challenged. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test not only their personal relationship but the very foundations of royal succession and constitutional monarchy. The morning sun climbed higher over Windsor Castle, as two very different interpretations of royal duty prepared to collide in what would become one of the most significant internal crises in modern royal history. The confrontation between William and Camilla took place in the Oak Room, a formal sitting room that had witnessed centuries of royal negotiations and family disputes. The morning light filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across the Persian carpets as the Prince of Wales entered to find his stepmother seated rigidly in a high-backed chair, every inch the commanding royal authority she believed herself to be. Camilla, William began, his voice steady but carrying an undertone of steel. I understand you have concerns about my recent activities. The Queen Consort did not rise or offer any of the usual pleasantries that typically marked their interactions. Her posture radiated cold authority as she regarded the heir apparent with calculating eyes. William, your behavior over the past week has been deeply concerning. Your unauthorized investigation into confidential royal matters demonstrates a troubling disregard for proper authority structures. William remained standing, a subtle but significant choice that established his refusal to be diminished by her accusations. I have been reviewing financial discrepancies through entirely appropriate channels. These are matters that require transparency and accountability. Transparency? Camilla's voice rose slightly, the first crack in her composed facade. You have been undermining decisions made with full royal authority during your father's illness. This is not about transparency, William. This is about your inability to accept that authority does not automatically belong to you simply because you are heir. The accusation hung in the air like a physical presence. William understood now that this confrontation transcended any financial irregularities. This was about fundamental questions of power and succession that had been simmering beneath the surface for years. "My concerns are not about authority," William replied carefully. "They are about ensuring that the monarchy operates within constitutional bounds. The unauthorized redirection of duchy funds requires proper parliamentary oversight." Camilla stood abruptly, her composure finally cracking completely. "Constitutional bounds? I have been managing this family's affairs while your father recovers from serious illness. Every decision I made was in the best interests of the crown." "Best interests according to whose judgment?" William's question was quiet but devastating in its implications. The queen consort moved closer, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "According to the judgment of someone who has dedicated decades to this institution, who has endured public scrutiny and private humiliation for the privilege of serving. According to someone who understands that sometimes decisive action is more important than bureaucratic procedures." William saw clearly now the depth of resentment that had been building within Camilla. Her years of working to rehabilitate her public image, her careful cultivation of respect and authority, had created expectations that extended beyond her constitutional role. "Camilla, I respect your dedication and your service to this family, but personal sacrifice does not grant unlimited authority. The monarchy's strength comes from its adherence to established principles, not from individual will." "Individual will?" Camilla's laugh was harsh and bitter. "Everything I have done has been in service to this crown that your mother nearly destroyed with her public campaigns and emotional manipulations. I rebuilt what she damaged." The mention of Diana created a sudden, dangerous silence. William's expression remained composed, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop by several degrees. "My mother is not the subject of this conversation," he said quietly, but with unmistakable warning. Camilla seemed to realize her mistake, but pride prevented her from backing down. "Isn't she? Your hostility toward my authority, your refusal to recognize my rightful role during your father's incapacity, your determination to undermine my decisions. None of this is really about financial procedures, is it, William?" The accusation was devastating in its accuracy and completely wrong in its interpretation. William did harbor complicated feelings about Camilla's role in his family's history, but his current concerns were genuinely constitutional rather than personal. "This conversation ends now," William said, his voice carrying the full weight of royal authority. "I will continue my review of the financial irregularities through appropriate channels. If you have concerns about my methods, you may raise them with the proper authorities." "The proper authorities answer to me in your father's absence," Camilla replied coldly. "No, Camilla. They answer to the crown, which is bigger than any of us individually." William turned to leave, but Camilla's voice stopped him at the door. "If you persist in this course of action, I will have no choice but to treat your behavior as insubordination against lawful royal authority. The consequences of such actions can be severe." William turned back slowly, understanding now that Camilla was not merely angry or defensive. She genuinely believed she possessed the authority to take action against him. "Are you threatening me?" "I am warning you. Your father placed his trust in my judgment during his illness. That trust comes with both privilege and responsibility. I will not allow anyone, including you, to undermine the stability of the monarchy through reckless actions." William studied, his stepmother's face seeing determination mixed with something that looked almost like desperation. He realized that she had convinced herself so thoroughly of her righteous authority that she could not see the constitutional impossibility of her position. "Commander Harrison informed me of your extraordinary directive this morning," William said quietly. "I assume you realize the implications of such an order?" Camilla's surprise was momentary but telling. She had not expected Harrison to disobey her direct command by informing William of the arrest order. "Commander Harrison serves at the pleasure of the crown," she said stiffly. "Yes, he does. And his loyalty to that crown prevented him from carrying out an unconstitutional order that would have damaged the very institution we are all sworn to protect." The realization that her authority had been questioned and effectively refused by the Royal Protection Unit seemed to stun Camilla into temporary silence. William used that moment to deliver his final statement. I will continue my investigation through proper channels. You may agree or disagree with my methods, but you do not have the constitutional authority to prevent them. I suggest we both remember that the monarchy is stronger than our personal conflicts. William left the oak room knowing that the crisis was far from resolved. Camilla remained seated, staring at the closed door, her mind racing through options that were rapidly narrowing as the reality of constitutional limitations closed around her assumed authority. Within an hour of William's departure from the oak room, Camilla had summoned a full gathering of the Royal Protection Unit's senior staff. The ornate conference room adjacent to her private offices buzzed with tension as 8 uniformed officers assembled, each wondering why they had been called for an emergency meeting during what should have been a routine morning. Commander Harrison entered last, his face carefully neutral despite the turmoil of the previous 12 hours. He had spent the interim period consulting constitutional experts and reviewing legal precedents, preparing for what he suspected would be an unprecedented test of military loyalty versus royal hierarchy. Camilla entered with the bearing of a monarch addressing her court. She had changed from her morning attire into a formal navy suit that projected authority and gravity. Her demeanor suggested someone who had moved beyond anger into cold determination. Gentlemen, she began without preamble, we face a crisis of authority that threatens the stability of the monarchy during a critical period. The Prince of Wales has demonstrated a pattern of insubordination that cannot be tolerated. The officers exchanged glances, their discomfort evident. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison, second in command of the protection unit, cleared his throat carefully. Your Majesty, could you elaborate on the specific nature of this crisis? Camilla had prepared for this question, crafting her response to present William's constitutional actions as dangerous rebellion. The Prince of Wales has been conducting unauthorized investigations into sensitive royal business, potentially compromising confidential information and undermining established authority during His Majesty's illness. She paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle before continuing. More concerning is his direct refusal to acknowledge proper chains of command. When questioned about these activities, he became confrontational and threatening toward legitimate royal authority. Major Phillips, the unit's intelligence liaison, shifted uncomfortably. The description of Prince William's behavior seemed inconsistent with everything he knew about the heir apparent's character and constitutional awareness. Ma'am, Phillips ventured carefully, these are serious allegations. What specific actions are you requesting from the protection unit? Camilla's moment had arrived. She had convinced herself that bold action was not only justified but necessary to preserve the monarchy's integrity. I am ordering the immediate detention of the Prince of Wales pending a full investigation into his activities and fitness for his constitutional role. The silence that followed was deafening. 8 experienced military officers sat frozen, each processing the impossible nature of what they had just heard. Commander Harrison, despite having been warned, felt his stomach clench as the constitutional crisis became unavoidable. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison found his voice first. Your Majesty, with the greatest respect, such an action would require extraordinary justification and proper constitutional authority. Camilla's eyes flashed dangerously. I am providing that authority. During His Majesty's incapacity, I speak with the full power of the Crown. Are you questioning that authority, Colonel? Morrison, a veteran of 30 years of military service, understood he was being asked to choose between competing interpretations of loyalty and duty. Ma'am, I am seeking clarification of the legal basis for such an unprecedented action. Major Phillips leaned forward, his training in constitutional law compelling him to speak. Your Majesty, the Prince of Wales holds constitutional standing that cannot be superseded by executive decree. Any action against the heir apparent would require consultation with Parliament and the Privy Council. Camilla's facade of calm authority began to crack. Are you suggesting that I do not possess the authority to protect the Crown from internal threats during a crisis? Commander Harrison finally spoke, his voice steady despite the enormity of the moment. Your Majesty, we are sworn to protect the constitutional monarchy, which includes safeguarding all members of the royal family from threats both external and internal. We cannot act against one royal on the orders of another without clear constitutional justification. The room erupted in Camilla's barely controlled fury. Constitutional justification? I am the Queen Consort, speaking with full authority during the King's illness. The Prince of Wales has demonstrated clear insubordination and potential disloyalty. If you will not act on my direct orders, then you are failing in your fundamental duty. Captain Davies, the youngest officer present, spoke with the clarity that sometimes comes from inexperience with political nuance. Ma'am, our oath is to defend the crown, not to enforce personal disputes between members of the royal family. The accusation of personal motivation struck Camilla like a physical blow. Everything she had built, every justification she had constructed, suddenly appeared transparent and petty under the clear gaze of professional military officers who had dedicated their careers to understanding duty and constitutional service. Personal disputes? She repeated, her voice rising dangerously. This is about the fundamental authority structure of the monarchy. The Prince of Wales has challenged legitimate orders and undermined established decision-making processes. Major Phillips, emboldened by his colleagues' support, pressed further.
Ma'am, could you provide documentation of these orders and the specific manner in which they were challenged?
Camilla found herself trapped by her own narrative. The financial irregularities that had started the conflict were real, but they were irregularities in her own actions, not William's. His insubordination consisted of following proper constitutional procedures rather than accepting her unauthorized directives. The documentation is confidential and sensitive to ongoing royal business, she replied stiffly. Commander, Harrison recognized the evasion and felt compelled to address the fundamental issue. Your Majesty, without clear evidence of actual wrongdoing and proper constitutional authority to proceed, the protection unit cannot execute an arrest order against the heir apparent. Such an action would itself constitute a threat to constitutional monarchy. The room fell silent as the full weight of Harrison's words settled over the assembly. He had effectively refused a direct royal order and justified that refusal on constitutional grounds. The other officers, while privately agreeing with his position, understood they were witnessing a moment that would define their careers and potentially the future of the monarchy itself. Camilla stood motionless for several seconds, her mind racing through rapidly diminishing options. The unanimous resistance of the protection unit had stripped away her illusions of absolute authority and exposed the fundamental weakness of her position. I see, she said finally, her voice cold and controlled. It appears that loyalty to the crown has become a matter of personal interpretation rather than clear hierarchy. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison attempted to salvage some diplomatic solution. Ma'am, perhaps this matter could be resolved through consultation with the private secretary or the Privy Council. Camilla's laugh was sharp and bitter. Consultation with bodies that will undoubtedly support the heir apparent over the Queen Consort? I think not, Colonel. The meeting dissolved into uncomfortable silence as the impossible nature of Camilla's position became clear to everyone present. She had overplayed her hand catastrophically, revealing both her constitutional ignorance and her willingness to abuse royal authority for personal vindication. News of the protection unit's refusal to carry out Camilla's arrest order spread through Windsor Castle's corridors with the speed that only palace intrigue can achieve. By noon, every senior staff member knew that an unprecedented constitutional crisis was unfolding within the royal household, though few understood the complete scope of the conflict. Sir Edward Whitmore, the King's private secretary, found himself at the center of a situation for which centuries of protocol provided no clear guidance. He had served through scandals, divorces, and public relations disasters, but never a direct confrontation between senior royals over fundamental constitutional authority. Whitmore's immediate concern was King Charles, who remained bedridden, but was slowly recovering from his respiratory infection. The monarch was strong enough to conduct brief conversations, but hardly prepared for news that his wife had attempted to have his heir arrested. The delicate task of informing the king would require extraordinary diplomatic skill. Meanwhile, Prince William had retreated to his private study, where he was methodically documenting the morning's events for what he suspected would become a formal constitutional review. Catherine joined him there, having sensed the gravity of the situation from the unusual activity throughout the castle. The staff are all whispering about some kind of emergency, she told her husband quietly. What exactly happened this morning? William looked up from his careful notes, his expression grave. Camilla ordered my arrest for questioning her financial decisions during father's illness. The protection unit refused to carry out the order. Catherine absorbed this information with the composure that had made her an ideal royal consort, but William could see the shock in her eyes. On what grounds did she believe she had such authority? She convinced herself that her role during father's illness granted her absolute power over royal affairs, including the ability to detain family members who questioned her decisions. The implications were staggering. Catherine understood immediately that this was not simply a family dispute, but a fundamental challenge to the constitutional monarchy's structure. What happens now? William set down his pen and looked toward the window, where he could see guards maintaining their regular patrols as if the world hadn't shifted beneath their feet. Now we determine whether the monarchy is governed by law and tradition, or by whoever can claim the strongest voice in any given moment. Across the castle, Commander Harrison was conducting his own careful documentation, while preparing for what he knew would be intense scrutiny of his decision to refuse a direct royal order. His military training emphasized the importance of following lawful commands, but it also required him to refuse unlawful ones. The challenge lay in determining which category Camilla's directive fell into. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison knocked and entered Harrison's office, carrying a thick folder of constitutional law references. "Commander, I've been reviewing precedents for conflicts between royal authorities. The situation is extraordinarily complex." Harrison gestured for Morrison to sit. "What have you discovered?" "During royal incapacity, the Queen Consort does possess certain authorities, particularly regarding household management and ceremonial duties. However, there is no precedent for one royal ordering the detention of another, especially the heir apparent." Morrison opened his folder and withdrew several documents. "More importantly, our oath of allegiance is specifically to the crown as an institution, not to individual members of the royal family. When those members conflict, we are bound to support constitutional process over personal directive." Harrison nodded grimly. "That's consistent with my interpretation, but it places us in an impossible position politically. We have effectively refused to obey the Queen Consort. We have upheld our constitutional duty," Morrison corrected firmly. "There's a significant difference." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Sir Edward Whitmore, whose usually composed demeanor showed clear signs of strain. The private secretary had come to gather first-hand accounts of the morning's events before briefing the king. "Gentlemen," Whitmore began without preamble, "I need to understand exactly what transpired this morning. His Majesty is strong enough to receive a briefing, but I must present accurate information." Harrison provided a detailed account of Camilla's orders and the protection unit's response, while Morrison contributed the constitutional analysis that had guided their decision. Whitmore listened without interruption, occasionally taking notes on points that would require careful explanation to the king. "You understand," Whitmore said when they finished, "that your refusal to carry out the Queen Consort's direct order will be viewed by some as insubordination?" "Yes, sir," Harrison replied steadily. "However, we believe our actions were necessary to preserve constitutional integrity." Whitmore studied the two officers carefully. Both were career military men with impeccable records and deep understanding of their duties. Their decision to refuse Camilla's order represented careful judgment, rather than casual disobedience. "I will be meeting with His Majesty this afternoon," Whitmore said finally. "Your actions will be part of that briefing. I want you to understand that whatever criticism you may face, you acted correctly in an impossible situation." As Whitmore left to prepare for the most difficult briefing of his career, word arrived that Camilla had summoned the Lord Chamberlain, the Master of the Household, and 3 other senior palace officials. The Queen Consort was apparently attempting to build support for her position among the administrative hierarchy. The meeting took place in the throne room, a choice that seemed designed to emphasize royal authority and historical precedent. Camilla sat in one of the ceremonial chairs, presenting herself as the wronged sovereign addressing disloyal subjects. "Gentlemen," she began, "this morning's events have revealed a disturbing breakdown in proper authority structures within this household. The Prince of Wales has engaged in activities that undermine royal prerogatives, and the protection unit has refused to address this threat to institutional stability. Lord Pemberton, the Lord Chamberlain, was a diplomat by training and instinct." His response was carefully measured. "Your Majesty, could you elaborate on the specific nature of these undermining activities?" Camilla found herself again forced to justify actions that sounded increasingly hollow when subjected to scrutiny. The Prince of Wales has questioned legitimate expenditures made with proper authority during His Majesty's illness. His methods suggest a disturbing disregard for established chains of command. The master of the household, Sir James Crawford, had been managing royal finances for a decade and understood immediately that Camilla was describing William's discovery of her unauthorized transfers. His diplomatic training warred with his professional integrity as he chose his words. "Ma'am, if there are concerns about financial procedures, perhaps those should be addressed through the proper oversight committees." "The proper oversight," Camilla replied sharply, "is through royal authority, not bureaucratic committees that may not understand the sensitive nature of these decisions." The assembled officials exchanged glances, recognizing that they were being asked to support a position that fundamentally misunderstood constitutional monarchy. Like the protection unit before them, they found themselves choosing between personal loyalty to a royal family member and institutional loyalty to proper constitutional process. The afternoon brought an unexpected development that would ultimately resolve the constitutional crisis in the most definitive way possible. King Charles, despite his illness, had insisted on being moved to his private study after receiving Sir Edward Whitmore's carefully worded briefing. The monarch's recovery had progressed enough to allow limited activity, and the gravity of the situation demanded his direct intervention. Charles sat propped against pillows in his desk chair, still pale from illness but with eyes that burned with quiet authority. Before him lay Whitmore's detailed report, Commander Harrison's incident summary, and copies of the financial documents that had started the entire conflict. The king had spent 2 hours absorbing every detail, understanding that his next actions would define the monarchy's relationship with constitutional law for generations. At 4 o'clock, Charles summoned both Camilla and William to his study. The meeting would take place without staff, advisors, or witnesses, a family confrontation that would settle matters of state through personal authority that transcended any constitutional ambiguity. Camilla arrived first, her demeanor a mixture of defiance and apprehension. She had convinced herself that Charles would support her actions once he understood the full scope of William's rebellion against royal authority. The Queen Consort took her usual chair beside the king's desk, positioning herself as his trusted advisor rather than a subject awaiting judgment. William entered precisely on time, his bearing respectful but not submissive. He understood that this meeting would determine not just the resolution of the current crisis, but the future relationship between traditional royal prerogatives and constitutional limitations. Charles looked at his wife and son for several moments before speaking, his voice hoarse from illness but carrying unmistakable authority. "I have been briefed on this morning's events. I find myself deeply disappointed in both of you, though for very different reasons." He turned first to Camilla, his expression grave. "My dear, your actions today represent a fundamental misunderstanding of both constitutional law and royal authority. The notion that you possess the power to order the arrest of the heir apparent demonstrates a concerning departure from proper procedure." Camilla's face flushed with indignation. "Charles, I was protecting the monarchy from internal threats during your illness. William's actions were undermining legitimate royal authority." "No," Charles replied firmly, his voice gaining strength. "William's actions were following proper constitutional procedure. Your actions were the ones that threatened legitimate authority by attempting to exercise powers that do not exist within our system." The king reached for one of the financial reports on his desk. "These documents show unauthorized redirection of duchy funds to various charitable organizations. While I support the causes you chose, the methods violated established oversight procedures. William was correct to raise these concerns through appropriate channels." Charles turned to his son, his expression softening slightly but remaining serious. "However, William, your approach lacked the diplomatic sensitivity required when dealing with family matters that intersect with official duties. You could have managed this situation more carefully." William nodded, accepting the criticism. "You're right, Father. I should have discussed my concerns with you directly before proceeding with formal documentation." "Perhaps," Charles agreed, "but your constitutional instincts were sound. The monarchy's strength depends on our adherence to proper procedures, even when they seem inconvenient or personally challenging." Camilla stood abruptly, her composure finally breaking completely. "This is exactly what I was trying to prevent. The heir apparent undermines royal decisions, refuses to acknowledge proper authority, and you support his insubordination because he follows bureaucratic procedures? Charles's response was quiet but devastating. Camilla, there was no royal authority to undermine. You exceeded your constitutional role and attempted to exercise powers that belong neither to you nor to any individual member of this family. The monarchy is not a personal fiefdom, where authority derives from proximity to the throne. The room fell silent as the full weight of the king's judgment settled over them. Camilla realized that her bid for absolute authority had not only failed but had exposed her fundamental misunderstanding of the very institution she sought to control. The protection unit acted correctly in refusing your order, Charles continued. Commander Harrison and his officers demonstrated precisely the kind of constitutional loyalty that preserves our system. They understood that their oath is to the crown as an institution, not to individual royal preferences that conflict with law and tradition. Charles reached for a formal document that Whitmore had prepared. I am issuing a royal directive that clarifies authority structures during periods of royal incapacity. Future decisions regarding financial matters will require consultation with appropriate oversight bodies, regardless of the urgency claimed by any individual. He looked directly at Camilla. Your charitable work and dedication to various causes are valuable and appreciated. However, your role does not include unilateral authority over constitutional matters or the power to detain other members of the royal family. The directive effectively stripped Camilla of the expanded authority she had assumed during Charles's illness, returning her to the traditional supportive role of queen consort. More importantly, it established clear precedent for future situations where royal family members might conflict over constitutional matters. William understood that his father's handling of the crisis had achieved something remarkable. Rather than simply resolving the immediate conflict, Charles had strengthened the constitutional foundations of the monarchy by demonstrating that no individual, regardless of their position, could claim authority beyond established law and tradition. Father, William said quietly, I want to apologize for allowing this situation to escalate to such a degree. In the future, I will ensure that family concerns are addressed through more appropriate diplomatic channels. Charles nodded approvingly. Constitutional monarchy requires both adherence to proper procedure and sensitivity to family relationships. We must find ways to honor both requirements. Camilla remained standing, her face a mask of controlled fury and wounded pride. The woman who had spent decades building her authority and respect within the royal family had seen both evaporate in a single day through her own overreach. I acted in what I believed were the best interests of the crown, she said. Stiffly, I know you did, Charles replied gently, but good intentions cannot justify improper methods. The monarchy's credibility depends on our collective commitment to constitutional principles, even when they constrain our individual preferences. The meeting concluded with a formal reconciliation between William and Camilla, though both understood that their relationship had been permanently altered. The queen consort would continue her charitable work and ceremonial duties, but within clearly defined constitutional limits. The heir apparent would proceed with his financial review through proper channels, with enhanced attention to diplomatic sensitivities. Most importantly, the crisis had demonstrated that the British constitutional monarchy possessed the internal strength to resolve even unprecedented conflicts through adherence to law, tradition, and institutional loyalty that transcended personal ambitions. The guards who had stayed loyal to constitutional principle rather than personal authority had preserved the very system they were sworn to protect.